A homeless girl, desperate for food, decides to break into a mansion in hopes of finding something to eat. However, once inside, she stumbles upon an elderly man tied to a bed, realizing the place is far from what she imagined. The storm showed no mercy. The sky, heavy and gray, unleashed its fury in relentless rain, while fierce winds tangled Bruna's damp hair. At just 15 years old, she clung tightly to her younger brother, Victor, pressing his trembling body against hers. The little boy shivered, not only from the biting cold but from the fear that each deafening clap of thunder brought. "I'm scared, Bruna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The siblings huddled together in a narrow alley behind a shoe store, seeking shelter from the storm. A piece of soggy cardboard served as their makeshift roof, though it failed to keep the relentless rain from soaking them further. "Don't worry, Vitinho. The rain will stop soon," Bruna said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound calm. She couldn't let him see her fear, but it was impossible to hide completely. The 7-year-old clung to his sister, his tiny, trembling hands gripping hers as his wide eyes reflected the occasional flash of lightning. His quiet sobs cut through the storm, breaking Bruna's heart. "I'm hungry, Bruna," he murmured, his words barely louder than the rain. That simple plea hit her harder than any thunderclap. Tears welled up in her eyes as she fought to hold them back. She had to stay strong for him. Their last proper meal felt like a distant memory, replaced by scraps of stale bread or discarded leftovers found in trash bins. But tonight, Bruna resolved, things had to change. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and each passing car splashed water across the streets, blending with the tears streaming down Victor's face. Umbrella-clad pedestrians hurried by, sheltered from the chaos of the storm, without so much as a glance toward the narrow alley where the siblings huddled. Bruna's heart ached as she looked at her little brother. He was cold, hungry, and terrified, and it was her responsibility to protect him. "I promised Mom I'd take care of you, Vitinho," she thought, gently running her fingers through his damp hair. The pounding rain was deafening, but it couldn't drown out the growls of an empty stomach. Victor curled into himself, as if trying to shield his small frame from the world's cruelty. Bruna glanced up at the stormy sky, her face wet with both rain and desperation, silently whispering, "God, please help me. What do I do to keep him safe?" Deep down, she already knew the answer, and it made her chest tighten. For days, an idea had been forming in her mind, a thought she couldn't shake. Stealing. She knew it was wrong. Her mother's stories about right and wrong, about honesty and principles, echoed in her mind. But those lessons felt distant and powerless against the hunger gnawing at Victor, the relentless storm, and the ache in her heart. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and pain, but one thing was crystal clear: if taking from those who had plenty was the only way to ensure her brother wouldn't suffer, then she would do it. No matter what it cost her. The young homeless girl knew there was only one way, even though it went against everything she had ever been taught. The rain had eased into a steady, cold drizzle, as if the sky couldn't decide whether to rest or keep crying. She brushed her damp, tangled hair from her face and hugged her little brother tightly one last time before stepping away. "Stay here, Vitinho. Don't leave this alley until I'm back. I promise I'll bring plenty of food," she said, locking eyes with the boy. Victor's excitement was impossible to hide, his smile momentarily brightened the gray day. "Really, Bru? We'll have bread again?" he asked eagerly. "Yes, my love, and maybe even a sweet treat," she replied, forcing a smile to mask the turmoil twisting in her chest. The joy in his eyes warmed her heart for a brief moment, but the weight of reality quickly returned. She knew what she was about to do was wrong. Her parents, though they had lived in misery, had always emphasized the importance of honesty. "Thieves steal, and we are not thieves. We just don't have a home," her father's voice echoed in her memory. Yet the harshness of their situation was undeniable. They hadn't eaten in 2 days, and Victor was growing weaker by the hour. She had to take care of him, just as her parents had asked her to do before they were gone. "Forgive me, Mama, Papa," Bruna murmured silently, the weight of guilt and hunger pressing heavily on her. "I have to do this for Vitinho." Without looking back, Bruna began walking through the rain-soaked streets. The soles of her worn-out sneakers splashed through puddles as she moved toward her destination, a mansion she had spotted days earlier while searching through trash bins for scraps of food. In a wealthy neighborhood stood an enormous house, its high gates and lavish details radiating opulence. The walls were adorned with carefully maintained ivy, and the windows were always closed, hiding the lives of those inside. During her wanderings, Bruna had noticed that the homeowner was an older woman, likely in her 60s, who seemed to live alone. For days, the young homeless girl had lingered nearby, observing the woman's routine. She had learned that the lady left every day in a sleek black car and didn't return until evening. This predictable schedule was the key to a plan that had begun to take shape in Bruna's mind. "I'll only take a little food," she told herself, trying to justify her intentions. She has so much, she won't even notice it's gone. For weeks, Bruna had fought against the urge to steal, surviving on scraps and begging for change. But now, the hunger was unbearable, especially when Victor cried in pain and weakness as she held him in her arms. Her resolve, fragile at first, had solidified. There was no other option, she had to take care of her little brother, no matter the cost. With the sky still overcast and a persistent drizzle falling, she pulled the hood of her worn-out sweatshirt over her head and made her way to the mansion. Just as she had expected, the older woman emerged, dressed in elegant clothes, and stepped into the waiting luxury car. Bruna watched as the vehicle turned the corner, disappearing down the street. Hidden behind a bush, she stayed perfectly still, her heart pounding so hard it felt as if it might burst from her chest. The light rain continued, dampening her face and making her hair cling to her forehead. She swallowed hard, knowing exactly what she was about to do. It felt wrong, but the image of her little brother, hungry and teary-eyed, was the only thing giving her the strength to move forward. Bruna waited a few more minutes, ensuring the car wouldn't return. In the stillness, the sound of her growling stomach seemed louder than the soft drizzle. "I have to do this," she whispered to herself, clenching her fists and taking a deep breath. After 30 minutes, she finally made her move. With quick, quiet steps, she slipped into the mansion's garden. The meticulously maintained plants glisten with rain, and each step she took caused a faint splashing sound, making her even more on edge. Her eyes darted around, scanning for cameras or motion sensors. When she reached the back door, she realized it led to the kitchen. Through the glass pane, she could see a massive stainless steel refrigerator gleaming under the warm interior lights. Her stomach growled again, spurring her on. Bruna carefully pulled 2 hairpins from the pocket of her hoodie. Her father had taught her the trick when he was still alive. "Never use this for the wrong reasons, Bruna. Only to keep yourself safe," he had said. But in this moment, protecting her brother was her only goal. With practiced precision, she worked the pins into the lock. When she heard the click of the latch, it felt deafening, like an alarm ringing in her head. Yet the actual security system remained silent, perhaps out of luck, destiny, or sheer negligence. Slowly, she pushed the door open, and a sigh of relief escaped her lips. She stepped inside, barely able to believe it. "I can't believe I'm in," she murmured, pausing to take in her surroundings. The kitchen was breathtaking, a pristine marble countertop, gleaming cabinets, and a sense of order and abundance she hadn't seen in years. Light-colored wood paneling reached up to the ceiling, framing an enormous central table that exuded elegance. Bruna made her way to the refrigerator and opened its door, revealing shelves stocked with vibrant fruits, rich cheeses, meats, and an array of foods she and Victor hadn't tasted in ages. Her eyes landed on a flawless red apple with a glossy skin and a fresh aroma. She grabbed it and took a bite, the sweet juice flooding her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, closing her eyes for a brief moment as the flavor transported her to a world free of hunger and despair. "Victor's going to love this," she murmured, feeling a pang of emotion. Carefully, she began filling a small bag with fruits, bread, and a few packets of cookies she found in the cabinets. She made sure not to take too much, just enough so the homeowner wouldn't notice. As she packed, her gaze wandered around the expansive kitchen. It was vast and stunning, a place that seemed worlds away from her reality. For a fleeting moment, she imagined what life would be like here. Victor could sit at the grand table, enjoying a proper meal, never knowing hunger again. The thought brought a bittersweet smile to her face. Her musings were abruptly interrupted by a muffled noise that made her freeze in place. What was that? She wondered, her body tensing. She held her breath, straining to hear. A faint murmur drifted from deeper within the house, followed by another sound, a low, distant groan. Her heart pounded in her chest. Still clutching the bag, Bruna hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. The sound persisted, drawing her in. Reluctantly, she set the bag and the half-eaten apple on the table, then took a few cautious steps toward the noise. The hallway stretched ahead of her, adorned with ornate paintings, while the wooden floor creaked softly beneath her careful footsteps. The eerie sounds grew clearer as she ventured further, her pulse quickening with every step. As Bruna approached the closed door at the end of the hallway, the strange sounds grew louder, sending chills down her spine. Her trembling hand reached for the doorknob, hesitating as uncertainty filled her mind. Every instinct told her to leave, but an inexplicable pull urged her to see what was behind that door. Slowly, she turned the knob, the door creaking open to reveal a scene that stopped her breath and shattered her composure. Lying atop a thick, rumpled comforter on a grand bed was an elderly man. But he wasn't merely resting. His wrists and ankles were tightly bound with leather straps, and another strap was fastened across his chest, holding him firmly in place. A cloth gag covered his mouth, not tight enough to hurt him, but enough to stifle his speech. The muffled cries she had heard earlier were his, desperate and unrelenting. "Oh my God," Bruna gasped, her hands instinctively covering her mouth. The man's eyes snapped to hers, wide with panic and filled with tears. He began thrashing against his restraints, trying to call out to her, his gag muffling his cries for help. His pleading expression was heartbreaking, each muffled sound begging her to do something. For a moment, Bruna stood frozen, her mind racing as if the floor beneath her had vanished. What was supposed to be a quick, simple act of stealing food had spiraled into something far beyond her imagination. Who was this man? Why was he tied up like this? Questions stormed through her mind as she struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. Was he a dangerous criminal? Or could he be the owner of the house, a victim in need of rescue? The possibilities swirled in her head, leaving her paralyzed with indecision. Bruna's mind raced with doubts. Was this an elaborate trap? Could the owner of the house, or perhaps someone far more sinister, be behind this? Every possibility gnawed at her resolve, yet she found herself moving instinctively. Her feet carried her to the bed, driven by a mix of compassion and urgency, even as her hands trembled with fear. "Stay calm, sir. I'll help you," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. She bent over the bed and began fumbling with the leather straps. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might burst. Her fingers shook as she worked on the buckles, but she didn't stop. "Who could do something like this to you?" she muttered under her breath, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. The elderly man's tear-filled eyes locked onto hers, a desperate plea for help shining through. That look, a blend of hope and despair, pushed Bruna to ignore her fears and focus entirely on freeing him. After what felt like an eternity, she managed to release the final strap holding him down. She then reached for the cloth gag covering his mouth, tugging it away with some effort. The moment it came off, the man gasped deeply, as though he had been holding his breath for days. Thank you," he whispered between heavy breaths, his voice shaky and weak. His words came out slowly, laden with gratitude. Bruna froze for a moment, watching him as the reality of what she had just done sank in. The man stared at his now freed hands, and tears began streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. He wept softly, his shoulders trembling as he murmured inaudible words. Bruna's chest tightened, an ache blooming within her as she witnessed his pain. "You saved my life," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with sincerity. "Thank you, my dear. You have no idea what you've done for me." Before Bruna could respond, the elderly man attempted to rise from the bed. His movements were slow and strained, as though every joint in his body resisted him, but his determination was clear. "We need to leave, now," he urged, gripping Bruna's arm for support as if danger lurked nearby. Bruna was overwhelmed, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this man? What had she stumbled into within this grand mansion? "Please, my dear, get the phone from the living room," he pleaded, his watery eyes filled with desperation, his voice trembling. Without hesitation, she nodded and darted through the hallways. Her heart raced, not just from the exertion but from the tension gripping her. Reaching the living room, she spotted the phone, snatched it up with trembling hands, and hurried back to the bedroom. Handing it over, she watched as he clutched it tightly, as if it were his only lifeline. His shaky fingers dialed a number with urgency. Seconds stretched endlessly until someone answered on the other end. "It's me," the man said, his voice breaking. He began to sob uncontrollably, thick tears rolling down his lined cheeks. "Son, it was all a lie. That woman, she lied about everything. She tied me up," he managed between broken sobs, clutching the phone as though it might ground him. Bruna stood frozen, unable to find words, her heart caught in a whirlwind of pity and confusion. She watched as the man, who introduced himself as Jair, broke down, his anguish raw and unfiltered. Through his grief, Jair's story began to take form. At 69 years old, he had spent a lifetime building a fortune as the owner of a highly successful toothpaste manufacturing company. He had devoted decades to the business, growing it into a remarkable empire. And now, here he was, reduced to pleading for help from a complete stranger. Jair was a well-respected figure in the business world, a man who had built a thriving company and created a stable, prosperous life. He was married and, alongside his beloved wife, raised their only son, Josue. Jair had spared no effort to provide his son with the best opportunities. Together, the family enjoyed a happy and fulfilled life. However, everything changed when Jair's wife passed away. Her death shattered his world, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. Devastated, Jair leaned heavily on Josue, who became his source of strength. Despite his grief, he continued managing his business, while Josue pursued a degree in engineering. Eventually, Josue graduated and secured a job overseas in Argentina. His departure left Jair alone in Brazil. Although Josue maintained regular contact and visited whenever he could, he couldn't help but worry about his father. The isolation was clearly taking a toll on the elderly man. Hoping to ease his father's loneliness, Josue suggested he consider remarrying. Initially, Jair resisted. His late wife had been the love of his life, and the idea of moving on felt almost impossible. But as the weight of solitude grew heavier, he reluctantly opened himself to the idea. That's when Jair met Marian, an elegant woman just a few years younger than him. She had never been married, and her warmth and attentiveness quickly won him over. Jair was smitten, and before long, they were married. Josue felt relieved, believing his father had found someone who would take good care of him. What neither of them knew was that Marian was a seasoned con artist. She had been married several times before, vanishing with her husband's wealth each time. Jair had unknowingly become her next target. Shortly after Josue moved abroad, Marian's demeanor shifted. The sweetness and affection that had charmed Jair disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. She began drugging him with substances that left him groggy and disoriented. Whenever he started to regain clarity, he would find himself tied to the bed, helpless to resist or seek help. While he was confined, Marian freely spent his fortune, using his credit cards to fund her extravagant lifestyle. Marian's reckless spending spiraled out of control as she maxed out Jair's credit cards on lavish purchases. She indulged in a lifestyle of luxury, treating herself as if she were royalty. To ensure her control over Jair, she forbade him from having direct contact with his son. Instead, she coerced him into recording brief video messages, where he would assure Josue that everything was fine. At first, Josue found the situation odd, but his busy schedule kept him from probing further. Convinced by his father's reassurances, he pushed his concerns aside. Meanwhile, Jair's life had turned into an unrelenting nightmare. Each day felt like a fresh torment as he prayed for a miracle or, at times, an end to his suffering. The hope of escape seemed impossible until one fateful day when an unexpected visitor entered his life. The turning point came when Bruna, a young homeless girl, sneaked into Jair's home intending to steal food. As she cautiously entered the room, her eyes widened in shock at the sight of the restrained elderly man. Jair, in turn, saw her as his last glimmer of hope. Her arrival reignited a flicker of determination within him. On the other side of the world, Josue listened in disbelief as his father recounted the horrors he had endured over the past months. His voice trembled with sobs, his despair palpable. Josue's heart ached with anger and guilt. "How could she do this to you, Dad? That vile woman," he exclaimed, his fury barely contained. "Stay hidden. I'm coming home immediately. Don't let her find you until I arrive." Jair hung up the phone, his hands still shaking. Fear gnawed at him as he imagined Marian returning at any moment. Seeing his distress, Bruna acted quickly. "Sir, I know a place where we can hide. It's not much, but it's safe for now," she said with urgency. Desperate and out of options, Jair agreed. Bruna led him to the alley where she and her younger brother, Victor, had been living. The sight of the makeshift shelter broke Jair's heart, but for the first time in months, he felt a faint sense of security. The shelter was damp and cold, a fragile refuge made of old boxes forming makeshift walls and pieces of cardboard laid out as flooring. Inside, a small boy sat quietly, but his face lit up when he saw his sister return, especially when he noticed the bag of food she carried. "Vitinho, look what I got!" Bruna exclaimed, trying to sound cheerful. The boy leapt up with excitement and hugged her tightly. Jair watched the scene unfold, a mix of admiration and sorrow in his eyes. Seeing the children relish apples and bread as if it were a grand feast stirred something in him. It dawned on him that happiness required so little, just peace and companionship, things his deceitful wife had never truly offered. That evening, the three of them sat together and shared their stories. Jair recounted the heartbreak of losing his beloved wife and how he had foolishly trusted Marian. In turn, Bruna opened up about the hardships she and Victor had faced since losing their parents. Gradually, a bond formed among them, and Jair began to feel a deep affection for the siblings. As the first light of dawn broke, Jair's phone rang. It was Josue. "Dad, I'm here. I've just arrived and I'm on my way to the house. Wait for me," he said. Jair felt a surge of renewed hope. With energy he hadn't felt in months, he turned to the children and said, "Let's go, kids. I want you to witness that woman being taken to jail." The three made their way back to the mansion, where Josue was already waiting with the police. When they rang the doorbell, Marian opened it, expecting to see Jair groveling to return. "Where have you been?" she started, a smug grin on her face. But the moment she spotted Josue flanked by officers, her expression shifted to sheer panic. "Oh, darling, what's going on here?" she stammered, her voice betraying her fear. With a strength he didn't even know he had, Jair stood firm and told Marian, "It's over now." The police moved in swiftly, handcuffing her as she screamed apologies and lies. The scam artist was escorted straight to jail, denied any further opportunity to deceive. Once the police car door slammed shut, Jair collapsed to his knees, overcome with emotion. His son, Josue, embraced him tightly, feeling deep remorse for not noticing his father's suffering sooner. "It's all over now," Josue reassured him. "It's all thanks to this young lady." The young woman, a bit embarrassed, stood by her little brother, who looked at her with admiration. Then, to their surprise, Jair wiped his tears and did something that would forever change their lives. "You too. I want you to come live with me," he said. Bruna's eyes welled up with tears as she struggled to hold back her happiness. "We're really going to live here, right?" she asked. Victor jumped up in excitement, unable to contain his joy. Bruna, overcome with emotion, couldn't find the words to speak. Her heart was overflowing with hope. Jair and Josue exchanged smiles, moved by the moment. That day, a new chapter began for all of them. The four of them, once strangers, had found what they had longed for, a home and a family to call their own. The children's lives were forever changed. They would never again experience hunger or the bitter cold. They had everything that Jair could offer, and more, the love and companionship of two kind-hearted souls who would never leave him alone. It was a remarkable ending, one no one could have predicted. But just as this man and the two homeless children found a new life, there's another equally astonishing story I want to share with you. Simply click on the video that's showing on your screen, and I'll be waiting for you there.